In this tutorial, I'm going to talk you through an approach to helping you prepare for your write-up of your geography higher investigation. So the first thing is that it's a 30-mark assignment and it's worth 27% of your overall grade. It's a timed event, so you've got 90 minutes to do this unless you get extra time. And what you're going to want to do is break up your assignment into the kind of the 4 key parts that make it up. Okay, you'll be reminded of the structure that you want to write to on the day, but what you're going to try to do is maybe get all of your introduction points onto one small flashcard or onto one revision resource and then learn them. So your introduction is worth 6 marks, and it should start with your aim. So you're going to want to know what your main aim is. You're then going to want to describe Bradshaw's model and explain why we are studying Bradshaw's model, because obviously his is the model that helps us understand how characteristics of a river change downstream, and that we're aiming to prove or disprove whether his model is correct. And then what you're going to possibly want to do is evaluate. That's an optional. That is telling me whether his model was accurate or not. What makes it more accurate? What makes us believe his model? But that is an optional aspect to this. If you think that you might not have enough time to do that, you might choose not to. Finally, and most importantly, because this is where the majority of the marks come from, you're going to want to explain 6 different points that help me understand in detail how the characteristics of a river do change downstream. Now, they might relate to any of the characteristics, including ones that you are not planning on studying yourself. So it doesn't just have to be the discharge and your own research question. It can be any aspect of a river that you want to explain and tell me the story about why what factors might explain changes that you would see in your river. Okay. What's important, and I've got this in this final brackets here, is that do check your findings, because if you're making the same point in your findings to explain a result as you made in your introduction, you're not going to get the mark in one or the other. So you can't repeat. So if you've gone and explained how if a rock is permeable, the discharge might decline because water would be absorbed into that rock, and then you use that as a point in your findings to explain why the discharge dropped, you wouldn't get a second mark. Okay, so do just check between your introduction and your findings that you're not duplicating explanations. Right, so that's the first kind of key area that you're going to want to sort through and make sure you've got just the key ideas that you're going to want to write about, and then you'll make sure you learn them. Let's look at the methodology. It's also worth 6 marks. Now, there are some steps. You want to, first of all, explain that to gather discharge data, we have to visit a river, and you're going to want a paragraph, not a long one. Some of you were maybe writing a little bit too much in your practice, but you're going to want a paragraph that explains why the Amity Burn is a suitable river to study, and that will get you a mark. Remember, you've got to say in the context of gathering data for discharge. Likewise, you're going to want to give at least one explanation for why 9 sites were selected and how they were selected. Okay, and make sure you link that to why they are suitable for gathering discharge data. What you're then going to do is describe the technique you used to gather discharge data. And this is obviously, to get discharge, we need to know the width, the depth, and the velocity. So for each of them, there was a very specific technique. And once you describe the technique, you then got to explain why you did it the way you did it. So why did you pull it tight for the width? Why did you gather the number of depth readings you gathered? Why did you face the ruler upstream? Why was the flow meter, the impeller, placed just under the water level? Why were you standing downstream from the flow meter? Things like that. That's where the marks are actually awarded, when you explain why you did it the way you did it. Now you're going to repeat that same process of describing and explaining how you gather data for your own research question. Okay, now that's either going to be the hydraulic radius, that's going to be the bed load size, or the bed load shape. Okay, now finally, and this is optional, you can see that there, you can tell me about why some of the techniques you used might produce less than reliable data. Now, you only want to do this up to a maximum of 2 times. And you would only be choosing to do that if you weren't completely sure whether you were going to be awarded the full 6 marks for your method. Now, once you've completed your methodology, you want to get all these key ideas onto one sheet as well, so you can revise them and remember what the key points are. And remember, the key point in your method is the explaining and justifying why you did the technique the way you did it, okay, for both your discharge and your own research question. Now, with findings, this is where you have your 2 process data sheets, which you will be given on the day of the assessment. The first thing is you do want to start by giving the overall pattern for discharge. So you want to talk about the discharge graph, and remember, when you give the overall pattern, you want to say how much it started in QMEX, what was the discharge at the final site, site 9 in QMEX, and what was that, therefore, what was the overall change? You want to show a bit of a calculation. Then you want to talk about the fact that it varies, and you want to describe individual changes. Now, it doesn't have to be between every site, between 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 4. But you're going to want to pick a number of the key sites. Once again, always giving me data, so telling me what it's gone to and calculating how much of a change that has been from the previous site. Now, what's really important for your analysis marks is that you give me at least 5 or 6, and I have said at least, reasons for why the changes have occurred that you've identified from the graph. And I've said here, you don't want to repeat explanations that you offered in your introduction, okay? You want to then do exactly the same for your second graph. Now, this would be hydraulic radius graph, or the bed load size graph, or the bed load shape graph. So you're going to describe the overall pattern, and you're then going to describe any individual changes that you want to you spot that are significant. And then, just like you did, you're going to then try to explain at least 3 or 4 points, there we are, for why those changes in your own research question, why did they happen? Likewise, just as with the first research question on discharge, you don't want to repeat any points that you made in your introduction. Okay, finally, 2 key things. There's a nice way of picking up both processed information marks and analysis marks is where you refer to another graph you've got. So, for example, you might have the gradient graph, and you might have spotted that at a site you had a very steep gradient. So what you could say is the reason for my discharge increasing substantially at site 3 can be seen in my gradient graph. And then what you would say is my gradient for site 3 was a very steep slope of 3 degrees. Now, at that point, you'd get a mark for using the processed information. If you then said that this steep gradient caused an increase in velocity, which would increase the discharge, then you would get an explanation mark, an analysis mark. Now, you might also, for example, friction, if you're doing hydraulic radius, you might have the graph on rock size, and you might notice that in certain locations there was a very large rock size, and therefore your hydraulic radius dropped because there would be more friction. If you make the connection between those 2 graphs, you'd pick up marks for that kind of idea. Okay. Finally, if you are using photographs or maps that you've got on your sheets, refer to them, pick out some information from them, as in talk about the photo and tell me what the photo shows. That would get you a processed information mark. And if it's then used to explain the change that's happening in the river, you'd get a mark for explaining and analyzing. All right, finally, there's your conclusion. I need to know what your main findings for each research question are. I need you to refer directly to the main piece of evidence, the figure and the evidence from that supported that overall finding for each research question. I need to know if your hypothesis was accurate or not. And I would actually say in both of your hypotheses that they're reasonably accurate, as in overall between sites 1 and 9, you have proven them to be correct. But because there's so much change down the river, then I don't think you can say that's a conclusive. You can't definitely say I've proved it accurate or inaccurate. I would say you'd probably want to be saying that you need to do more research. Finally, if you want to get your final mark for your conclusion, you want to identify what you think was the main thing on your river, the most significant factor that influenced your results. Okay, this might be human interaction, it might be the valley sides, it might be the geology, and then you want to explain why you think that is the most significant factor in influencing the results as you went downstream. Final point is you might have chosen to do the statistical part of the findings, the conclusion. If you have done that, you're going to want to report when you're doing this bit up here, what your main finding was, you're going to then want to report the result of the statistical test and tell me how that helps achieve the second bit, proving or disproving your hypothesis. Okay, so if you've done that statistical test and watched those videos, then you'll be able to add that in. Now, you've got two final marks. One of them is you will get marks for using headings throughout the report, and also writing in what we call a coherent way, which is the same as saying, I can follow your arguments the whole way through. Your report was relatively easy to understand what you were writing. That's one mark. The second mark is that you are expected to be using key geographic terms throughout the whole report. So I should be seeing words like attrition, hydraulic radius, discharge. Key geography words should be littering your report. And that has been built into the very teaching of this report as we've done it. So that should be present throughout. Okay. Now, as I said at the start of this, what you want to do is break down these 4 chapters onto kind of a flashcard for each of them and outline what the main things that you're going to want to revise. Pop them onto the card. Use highlighter pens if you want for key words, key geographic terms, things you're going to want to remember. Remember, you do have your 2 process sheets on the day of the assessment, so you don't need to recreate them. Good luck revising, and hopefully you'll be fully prepared in order to allow you to access as high a mark as possible.